Welcome back to the Authentic Christian Podcast. I'm Aaron, this is Scott, and this is our special guest, Matt Wallen. All right, so in this episode, we're talking about when to cut off your hand. And if you don't know much about the Bible, you might think, what's wrong with these guys? It's something that Jesus discusses in Matthew 5:30 on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's talking about, the idea of dealing with temptation. So, don't report us yet for violence. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But
yeah, we'll have to consider that title on YouTube in the search there.
I mean, that would be clickbaity, wouldn't it? When to cut off your hand.
It would.
Like, whoa, what's wrong? These guys are wild. So we're talking about temptation and when to cut off your hand. And the discussion comes from Matthew 5:30, where the Bible says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it's more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And so this is part of a bigger section, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, and a section specifically on adultery. Before we read Matthew 5:27-30, this is Matt Wallen. So Matt is a good friend of ours. We're filming a lot of episodes today, and we don't know what order they'll air in. So Matt works for HouseetoHouse, Hearttoheart, which is a great group of guys and gals.
A great ministry.
Resource.
That service.
Go ahead. You want to talk? You can talk about it if you want.
Thank you.
I'm just saying, man. I like it.
No, I know. I just keep waiting. I'm like, he's done. He's done.
Man,
No, but basically, so we joke that Matt is like in basketball, you have the sixth man. So where you have your starting five, and then the guy that comes off the bench and is essential. So since Matt's behind the scenes, he doesn't even work for GBN really, but we're brothers in Christ, so we're on the same team, working for the Lord. That's right. You have the three guys of the podcast, Scott, me, and Tucker. And then Matt is always the guy off scenes, behind the scenes, like James is behind the scenes. But Matt is always helping us find congregations. So if someone says, hey, I watched the podcast, I need a congregation. I live in Houston, or I live in Dallas, or I live in someplace other than Texas. And we'll say, okay, great. And so Matt will help us, and we'll work together to find people. And we've even done stuff overseas, like in Cyprus, baptized kids. And so...
yeah, I don't know many other people that know where more Christians live than Matt.
Just the Lord. That's about it.
Not very good at anything. I just know a lot of people.
Hey, it's not what you know, it's who you know. There you go.
Look at that.
So, yeah, it's true. But, so this season 4, we wanted to have special guests on, and there's a lot of people I talked to that said yes to it. And then because of how crazy our schedule is and filming, you're actually the first guy we've got to come on and be a guest. So, in this episode, Matt is our guest, and he's talking with us about when to cut off your hand dealing with temptation. Scott, you're normally the reader. You want to read Matthew 5:27-30?
All right. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast to hell.
So he's talking here about dealing with temptation, and he shows really that adultery, it starts with lust in the heart. And so he contrasts, you've heard it said, but I say, which was unique. It shows Jesus says, I'm the authority, right? And so it shows that really any sort of temptation we have is a heart problem. And so to fix it, we have to look at the heart. Before we start the heart of the discussion, Matt, do you have Matthew 15? Can you read that? You have it up? I've got it. Matthew, yep. Scott, you want to read it again?
Sure. What do you want? 15?
I don't know. I just kind of threw that at Matt. Matthew 15.
I actually can read.
Okay.
A lot of people think I can't.
Yeah, I was going to say you're literate.
I think you can read it. He's sick and he's literate.
Or got a publishing company, but he's not literate.
No, that's true. That is true. Read Matthew 15. Read 10-20. This is a long one. It's like when you get a scripture reading and you're a kid. If you were like me, you're like, please be one verse. Please be one verse.
I changed my mind. I don't want to do it. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Starting in verse 10.
Yeah, 10-20.
When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear and understand, not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a man. Then his disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father had not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both of them will fall into a ditch. And then Peter answered him and said, explain this parable to us. So Jesus said, are you still without understanding? Do you not yet understand? Whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, theft, false witnesses, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man.
So if you think about the context of Matthew 15, in Matthew 15:2, the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem came to Jesus and said, why do your disciples transgress the traditions of our elders, of the elders? They don't wash their hands when they eat bread. So basically they came to Jesus, hey, why don't you guys wash hands? Why don't they wash their hands like we tell them to? And Jesus basically says, well, you basically don't follow God's command. You've made these laws, you put yourself in the place of king, and you're making laws for God. And so then Jesus says, it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles a man. Like if you wash your hands, that's not the bigger deal, but what comes out of the mouth. And then he says, whatever goes into the mouth and stomach is eliminated. Like if I eat food with dirty hands, that's going to go into my stomach and be eliminated. But then he says the problem with temptation in the heart, those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart. They defile a man. And so the things that defile you, sin, temptation problems, they come from the heart. And so basically he's saying evil things in our action or our speech, they all proceed from where? And that's a man's heart. And so the question is, how did they get there? We're not born. You weren't born with those things in your heart, like Calvinism and total depravity
your
teaches.
Heart's what? It's your mind, right?
That's right. Yeah. This is the heart in a man. This is the heart of a man. I heard some guy say that once. It just stuck with me.
Nice.
Every time I think of it.
I like it.
Yeah. So you were not born totally depraved, like Calvinism teaches. That's false. But that's where the bad things you have, the bad thoughts you have, and specifically talking about sexual temptation in this episode. But if you're watching this episode and you say, well, sexual temptation is not my weakness. I mean, not everybody struggles with that. I mean, what would you guys say to that?
Yeah, it's important to identify your weakness because that's the context here of sexual sin. And there may be some of that everybody deals with, but if that's not the big thing, that's a big struggle to you, just identify whatever it is. If we're going to do something extreme, like cut off our hand, which I know this is figurative, but honestly, if that's what it took, the willingness to do it is what we're trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to do something extreme like cut your hand off, I would do a little bit of research and a little bit of work before I made some drastic decision like that. So we just don't want to hack everything off, but which parts needs to go? Which do we need to get rid of? I think about somebody working out and all they do is upper body work. They skip leg day.
Oh, yeah.
And so then they complain, well, my legs hurt. Well, yeah, you're carrying this brick house around on toothpicks, you know? So work on whatever it is that needs fixing. Guard the areas that need guarding. And each of us are going to know what that is in our life.
It's always like
for those listening, identify that. And it reminds me of Nehemiah in chapter 4 and verse 13. He says when they're rebuilding the wall, he positioned families in the weak spots.
Yeah.
So that's what we do is position these barriers, these helps, get help in the areas where you're weak, whatever that is.
I interrupted. That was a really, really good thought. And I said, it's always leg day.
No,
but you just kept right on going, which you should have.
I was locked in. I didn't hear
I was
you.
like, I shouldn't have said this. But anyway, I'm glad you kept your thought. But you're right. That's a good point because you need to identify your weaknesses. Not everybody struggles with the same things, but you can take the same principles and identify it. Mm-hmm. So, okay, great thoughts. So how do we protect our heart? Because Jesus says, hey, the things that come out, if we're trying to say, hey, how do I protect against temptation? And ultimately you're trying to protect against it so you don't have those thoughts. And so those thoughts don't lead to you acting on it. No one ever committed adultery that didn't think about it first, right? So if you don't want to commit the action, then you want to say, okay, well, how can I even prevent that from being something I even think about? And so how can you eliminate the thoughts, right? And it all comes back to those thoughts come from your heart. So how would you guys say you protect your heart? How would you keep your heart pure?
I would say that you study the scriptures.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, the idea of renewing your mind with the scriptures each day, the idea of hiding them in your heart. Yeah. That's your mind, right? You're going to store them there. You're going to inundate your mind with that. That's probably the best way to protect your heart because, it's similar to this idea of what evil companionship corrupts good morals, right? So the things that you put alongside yourself in your life, in your vision, in your hearing, whatever, they'll affect your mind over time. So you want to choose to have those things to be positive influences. Yeah. Right. Overall, that's I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, I mean, protect your heart.
Yeah.
Watch for the things you put into it. I think Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all diligence, the New King James says, for out of it spring the issues of life. So guard your heart. I mean, what are you listening to music-wise? Like obviously when somebody hears sermons, scriptures, that's great. But if you're hearing sermons and scriptures like 2-3 times a week for 30 minutes, and then the rest of the week, it's just like TikTok, Instagram, Spotify music, bad podcasts, bad language, bad movies, bad TV. Like, what's going to win? I mean, they say you've got like the two wolves, right? The good wolf and the bad wolf.
Which one do you feed?
Yeah. Which one's going to win? The one you feed.
Yep.
So it's like you got your good heart, your godly heart, and your ungodly heart. Which one's going to grow? Well, the one you feed. And so watch, what are you reading? Are you reading the scriptures or some like, I don't know, dirty novel?
Yeah.
Right. What are you watching on TV? Are you watching good stuff? Are you watching bad stuff? Are you watching GBN?
Or your phone.
Or your phone.
Most of the time.
That's true. Watch your phone.
Watch their phone these days.
Yeah. But then, are you watching WVBS? Are you watching? Yeah. It doesn't have to be. It's not everything you watch on TV doesn't have to be a Bible lesson, right? Yeah. It doesn't. There's lots of things that are good you can watch, but protect the things you're putting in your heart. That's ultimately, it does matter what you watch or look at, because is that going to cause my heart to be molded to where I might be tempted by something,
And it's neat to me too. Science has discovered that you can literally make it easier to sin or harder, right? Because when it talks about the renewing of your mind, I know that's mainly spiritual, but I think there's a physical thing too, because there's the pathways in the brain. So what you do becomes easier. And if you want to do something else, it becomes harder. So the more you do what's right, the easier it is. It becomes your new normal, right?
Yeah.
But the more you sin, and then you're like, well, I want to do better. Well, you're making it harder every time you sin. So just if you work on these things, you can literally remap your brain and make it easier to do what's right.
Yeah. Romans 12:1-2.
Yeah, what you practice is going to become more natural for you.
Yeah.
So if you practice the right things and you go about that, then it's going to have that effect. I guess in a certain sense, maybe I've seen something like that in older people that have dementia or Alzheimer's, and I don't know how many you've known or whatever. Maybe I'm just an exception. I've known several.
Yeah.
But the ones who tended to be gentle and calm, things like that in their life before they got to that point, when they got to that point, tended to remain that way, right? So it's whatever you practice.
Yeah.
Once you even lose some control over your mind, those things that you practice are what are going to come out more naturally. I've seen that happen. I don't know how much science there is to it. I'm sure there's something to it. I'm not pretending I know everything about that, but I've observed that anecdotally in my own life.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Well, I guess you wouldn't be.
Goes along with, I think, what Matt was saying.
I guess what you're saying is essentially like, even if you were to lose your memory of who you are and stuff, like your base, I guess like your base demeanor, if you were kind, you'll still be kind. I guess.
What you've done, what you've put into your head, and the way you've behaved and all throughout your life will still come out in that, even when that goes
that's
away.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, I didn't know that. I haven't been around many people with dementia or Alzheimer's or anything.
That's universally true, but I've definitely seen that.
And the ones you've been around.
Yeah. Alicia's grandmother's that way. I've had uncles that way and other family members, people like that have gone through different versions of it, So anyway, I just thought that was what he was saying. That kind of sounded, it made me think of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how much weight there is or value to that, but
well, I mean, it makes me think of Matthew 6:22 in verse 23 says, the lamp of the body is the eye. If your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. If your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness, right? So basically the beginning of that is whatever you put in through your what? Your eye. I mean, that's the way I guess you could say your ears too, if you listen to stuff, but
what you choose to look at.
Exactly.
It reminds me of 1 John 1. John is saying like we saw him, we beheld him, we touched him.
Yeah.
So we used all our senses. No wonder that's what's coming out of us, because that's what we took in.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good point. What's the song? Be careful, little eyes.
Yeah.
What you see.
Yep.
Yeah.
And be careful, little ears, what you take.
And we know that's true when we want to step out of just where we've been. We know that's true with children. We know that's true just secularly as well, just in the worldly sense. You see children, they imitate what they see, what they hear, what they do most often is what they become best at. I mean, it's just true of all of us. It stays true.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. What are some examples you can think of in the scriptures of basically someone seeing something, being tempted, and it leading to sin?
David is the first one that jumps to my mind.
Okay.
And even think about, we're talking about sexual sin specifically in this context.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So you got the wisest man, Solomon, you got the strongest man, Samson, and you've got a man after God's own heart. And they all three fell victim to this sin, right?
Yep.
So if those men can do it, then every man in the world should realize this could be a blind spot.
Take heed lest you fall. Yeah.
Yeah.
He that thinks he stands, take heed lest you fall.
What comes before the fall?
Pride.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pride comes before fall.
And usually somebody who's prideful or egotistical doesn't think they have any need to change anything. Right?
And what is it? What is that? I mean, we're talking about sexual sin, and let's say adultery. Like if you're married and you're a man, what does that look like? What does pride look like? My guess is pride comes before a fall. It's this idea that, well, I would never succumb to that. Therefore, I'll do what? I'll put myself in situations. Yeah. No, it's okay for me to be alone with another woman. It's like, I remember when Vice President Mike Pence got sort of the rule he had, which is he's never alone with another woman. And it's so funny to me how they
I like that rule.
I do too. That's a rule we have. Like there's no, I'll never. And it has nothing to do with, it's not that I think that, someone else is not trustworthy. It's just, you don't ever put yourself in that position. Right. And so, that's what I think about like with a married man. Like if you get the idea, well, I would never succumb to that. So it's okay if I go down this road. It's like, all you're doing is what? Putting yourself in a situation that what? Tempts you, right? And let's say, well, it's not tempting to whatever. You can say what you want. You can make your own rule. But I think that's a wise thing because pride comes before a fall. And if you think, well, I would never do that, it's better
I agree.
to just say, no, that's my rule. Never doing it.
Yeah, and I think the point is we're trying to make it as hard as possible to sin.
Yes.
And we're not trying to add new laws like the Pharisees did because I'm not telling you the exact way you should live that out.
Not
I'm
at
holding
all.
you to it. But in my personal life, I want to make it as hard to sin as possible and as easy to do what's right.
That's right.
And especially if I'm tempted with something, like you have people that are tempted with pornography or something.
That's right.
And they have access to smartphones or they have their computer in a private place. That is a recipe for disaster. It's like, oops, I wasn't strong enough. Well, no, you weren't really designed to be in that situation. You got to get yourself out of that situation.
Well, it's like I've heard people talk about if you're an alcoholic in regards to the pornography discussion. Like, if you have a pornography problem and you like go to bed alone privately with your cell phone, it's like, that's like the same as like if you're trying to get away from alcohol and you have like a fridge full of like liquor. Yeah. It's like, what, you're just putting yourself in a hard position. Whereas I know some guys who got rid of their smartphones and kicked it. Why? Because they took aggressive action. They said, hey, this is my problem. And they go on like this, and hacked it off. They took violent and decisive action to end the problem, And what that verse says is because it's better for you to lose your member. It is better for you to lose your smartphone than to go to what? Than to go to hell.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting that a lot of times, that's a drastic step because I use my phone for a lot of stuff and I'll FaceTime and say, hey, is this what we're talking about or whatever? But it would be better to have no smartphone.
That's right.
Than to constantly fight temptation every day. And we all know people who have done that. So it's not like, even if you were the only one that did, it would still be worth doing. But we've known guys who have said, I can't have a smartphone. Yeah. I just can't, and that's okay.
And, you said identify your weaknesses. That's a real sign of maturity. Like I heard Cliff Goodwin say, this is big boy religion once. He was talking about Elijah, but he was talking about the context of that was he was talking about how Elijah in James, it says Elijah prayed. He was a man with like nature, like ours. He wasn't some Superman. He was, like nature, but he prayed. And the thing he prayed for made his life harder. He talked about he prayed for a famine. He prayed for something that made his life harder spiritually for a revival for the other people. And I think in sort of a smaller, and he said, that's big boy religion.
I like that.
And I really thought, I was like, I get what he's saying. It was like, it's completely simple, but it's like, if you really want like spiritual growth in your life, and that's a big problem, like you might have to make your life harder. Like you might have to cut off something that, hey, it's going to make my life a little more difficult. Maybe, but in the long run, when you're 80 years old and you look back at your life, if you live to be 80, are you going to say, man, I really wish I'd have dealt with that problem.
Yeah. If you could just,
or are you going to say, well, I didn't get to watch as many reels as I wanted to.
Yeah. If you could accept and lean into the concept that you want God to defeat you in the things you do wrong.
Yeah.
That if you're going down the wrong path, if you're trying to build the wrong thing or do whatever, or if you're just wrapped up in some chronic sin that you're just given to, you want God to come after you and to get you, right?
Yeah.
You don't want him to
not
care, right?
No. Yeah. You'd rather.
Doesn't Hebrews talk about this?
Yes.
Right.
The sons that he loves,
That's right.
he chastens.
That's right.
That's right.
man, if I didn't care about my children at all, I'd let them do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And then go and be dead on the street by the time they're 16.
Yeah.
I know that happens. I've watched people die at that age. I know that stuff happens.
Yeah.
And that's largely what I think of those parents that let their kids do that. You don't care about them.
Yeah.
You don't love them.
Yeah.
You're negligent. Do you think that we have a negligent father? No, you'd want God to come after you, right?
Yeah.
So, that's something we ought to desire. We should, maybe pray that. I've prayed that before. I'm not saying you have to do it. Like you were saying, these are just our personal anecdotes. This is just what we do. It's not law for you or anything like that, but a suggestion. Maybe pray or consider some version of praying. God, bless me in the things that we're doing right. Defeat us in the things we're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And just start with that concept. Understand that God is, he really is like a parent. You want him to play that role in your life.
Absolutely.
You need that in your life so that you can go and be with him in the next one. Right?
Yeah.
And that makes me think, like,
gold.
what if David, when he saw Bathsheba, it doesn't seem like maybe that was his fault that he did. Maybe it was. But what if he had immediately prayed to God about that situation? He's not going to make those same decisions. Or even if he ran to one of his spiritual men and said, hey, let's go for a walk, or let's go shoot some bows and arrows, or whatever to get away from the situation. So he tried to tackle it himself. Yeah. Which a lot of times we're not made to do that.
Yeah, we should just remember that in the grand scheme, we are all children. Like, even if you're like 96 and somehow you're like, getting around, you're still on this earth. You're still a child in the grand scheme compared to God. Yeah. Compared to him, we're nothing, right? Yeah. Any amount of wisdom we think we can have is nothing. So what should we always do? We should always default, no matter where we are, what phase of life we are in, to going to the Lord's word, to going to him in prayer, and to meditating on the things we know about it. Thinking about, okay, how did God respond when this person handled this situation that way? Is this similar to my situation? Should I handle it like them or not handle it like them? Like, consult the word of God, meditate on it, think about it. Yeah. Go to it for your wisdom and your guidance, right? Don't lean on your own self, right? Yeah. That's the idea. Yeah. So anyway.
That's great, man. That's great.
Yeah. If you take prayer out of it and the Bible out of it and other Christians out of it, what are you doing? Leaning on yourself.
There's nothing left.
But fighting the devil by yourself.
Yeah. And that's, I think, where most people find themselves, is fighting that battle alone. And then they're sad or depressed that they fell to sin. Well, you were always going to. You set yourself up for failure. We should be strong enough in moments like Joseph to resist temptation, but not forever. And even Joseph, right? He resisted temptation and he was on his own. But you look at the end of Genesis, it just rings wet with his tears. Yeah. He cries. Why? He's not a whole, healthy, emotional person because he had to do that for so long, and at what cost? Yeah. So when we take God and prayer and the Bible and other people out of it, that's not a position God has intended for us to be by ourselves for long.
Yeah. Right. That's a great point. We talked about this at PTP in one of the sessions, and we were like, we want to do it on a podcast episode. I don't think we ever got, can we all go to Proverbs? I know that there's lots of applications for different people, but we're talking a lot about temptation, and I guess we're talking about sexual temptation. So I know that women struggle with sexual temptation too, but I think like a lot of times it's guys. I just want us to read some of the things Proverbs says. Proverbs talks a lot about the adulterous woman. And of course, let's say this. You could say the same thing about adulterous men enticing women. It happens. Men try to entice women too. So I've got a list. Proverbs 2:16. So we're going to read about the immoral woman, but if you're a female, think of an immoral man. All right. Proverbs 2:16. Do you guys have here? Do you have this list, Scott?
Do I have the list?
Yeah, the logos. I shared the note. Look at it.
I do.
Look at the list I shared. Proverbs 2:16 is the first one. Do you have that list, Matt? Mm-hmm. Okay. So look at Proverbs 2:16, and let's just, like, I can hover over it and it'll read it. So I'm going to read 2:16, and then you guys, can you just hover over it and read each one, like in order? We'll just rotate. All right.
I can't do that because I'm not fancy with logos, but I'll get Proverbs 6 and 7.
Okay.
And y'all get the ones before and
after.
Okay,
good. All right. So Proverbs 2:16, it says, to deliver you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. All right. So what's the first thing that the seductress or seductor, if it's a man, does? They flatter you with what? Words. They'll say things that, this sounds really nice. I like that, right? Everybody likes to have nice things said about them. But if we're trying to stay close to God and his word, remember when someone starts seducing you with words and you're like, this is not a good thing. Okay. You got next one? You got 5:3?
I can. Yep.
Yeah, read 5:3.
For the lips of of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil.
Look at the next one, though. But in the end, verse 4, she is as bitter as wormwood, or it's poison, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lay hold of hell. Right? So he says, hey, look, an immoral woman or an immoral man, if you're a woman watching, they might just seem so sweet and smooth and all this. But in the end, if you go down that way of adultery or fornication, what? The end is what? Death. Her feet go down to hell. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lay hold of hell. Look at I got verse 20. I'm already there. Let me read it. Why should you, my son, be enraptured with an immoral woman and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. So God's what? God's watching. Remember everything. Anytime you're tempted, who's watching? God. Anytime you're tempted to act, who's watching?
That's right.
God.
And how can we shore ourselves up? Hey, man, verse 23, just a few down. This man died for a lack of instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can seek to not have that lack of instruction.
That's right. Good point. Good point. All right, Matt, you say you got 6 and 7, chapter 6?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll do that. And I was going to say,
too, go ahead.
God made us as sexual beings as well, spiritual beings, all these things. So God wants that for us, but he's saving it for the correct time and in the correct way. And it's natural that we would want to fill those voids in our life, but there are restrictions on that. We can't just do that in any way we want.
That's right.
So it makes sense that we would be tempted to fill that need, yes, but we're doing it the wrong way with the wrong person and things like that. So it's not no, this is a terrible thing. This is not the appropriate time for that. And that's why Song of Solomon is important. It says basically don't start something before it's time.
Yeah.
It's like trying to get toothpaste out of the tube and then put it back.
Yeah.
You can't do that. Once you've started down this path, sometimes it's too late.
Yeah.
And you're still accountable, but don't awaken something before it's time, right?
My middle son got a hold of our toothpaste tube and chewed the other end off. So it's hard to get that toothpaste back in a tube. You can't do it. Yeah. Okay.
Just spend $5 more, throw it away, start over.
I'm cheap, man. I'm like, put the, I'm like,
he said,
nothing.
Hey, baby, we still got some of that baking soda in the freezer.
Yeah. That's baking soda toothpaste.
Cheap.
That's kind of like.
Hey, that's cheap.
I like baking soda toothpaste.
That'll
That's
work.
what I use. All right. Okay.
All right. So chapter 6,
24, and I have 24, 32. But I wonder, read through 28, 29. Read 24 through 29.
Okay. Keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished.
So basically, don't think about this sin, sexual sin, because you'll be punished. And it says, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes and not be burned? What's the rhetorical answer?
Yeah, of course
not. Of course not. If you play with fire, you're going to get what?
Burned.
You're going to get burned. And that's the same way with temptation.
And I think it's important. Sexual sin will always cost you something.
Yeah.
It will kill a relationship. It will kill your purity. It's like with Adam and Eve. If they knew one son was going to be killed by the other one and then ostracized, would they have eaten that fruit?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think if they knew that, they wouldn't. And so it's the same with us when we're behind a laptop or a phone or behind a closed door. Not only is your soul in danger, the other person's, but you're doing harm that you don't even know about yet.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You might meet somebody one day and you look back and say, I wish I would have never done any of that stuff.
100%.
Look at verse 32.
But a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself.
So he says, look, man, I mean, you're a moron. I don't know.
Yeah, adultery is a pretty severe.
You got no sense, man. What's wrong with you? Like Scott, you got no sense. Like he's saying, if you would do this, you destroy your own soul. What in the world's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
I wonder if these verses came to mind for the disciples when they stood around Jesus and he was talking about divorce and remarriage and adultery there.
Yeah.
Just a side note. I was just thinking about that. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder.
It's like you said, it's going to end in your destruction. You go down these certain paths.
And who's writing most of these proverbs?
Solomon. Who would know?
Yeah. Who would know? And that's a question. I don't know. Do you guys know the answer to this? Does it say anywhere? Is there any allusion or hint? Did he write this at the end of his life, after, like Ecclesiastes, or did he write it before through the wisdom of God?
It's a good question, but I can't give you the answer.
I don't know that I know. I don't know that I've ever heard.
That question's come up. There is discussion about it. You should go read about it.
Okay.
I can say that
all right.
much.
You have to point me in the right direction of where to go.
I think so. There is some about when he wrote some of these things.
Okay. All right.
It was early or late.
Okay.
Because there's some question about, did he die faithful or not, or
Yeah,
whatever? Because you
yeah.
see the sins he did and what happened
Yeah.
following him. So yeah, there's
Because it seems to me
about that.
Ecclesiastes answers at least that question, which is
I would
he
think so.
realized he had done all these things, but
I believe he repented.
yeah, that's how I feel.
Personally, yeah.
But Proverbs, it's like, yeah, I wonder, did he write these
I think
things?
according to like rabbinic tradition, which
Yeah.
who knows if that's
Sure,
100%
sure.
right, but
Okay,
he
so
wrote
I don't
Song of Solomon early,
Okay,
Proverbs in the middle of his life, and Ecclesiastes at the end.
know.
that makes
Which
sense.
makes sense, but
It would make sense
don't know if
based on the
that's true.
content. Okay, cool. All right, you got 7 too. Proverbs 7:5. I said 7 also.
TOO.
Yeah, too.
All right, 7:5. They will keep you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words. And then is it verse 10?
Verse 10.
Then came out a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty
Oh, hold on. We got to
intent.
read more on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, go back
up.
to 7. Go to 7:6 and read. This one's so good. 7:6. Read.
Well, let me
Man, just
let me
keep
start
going.
in verse 4 and go down.
Yeah, that's great.
So, this whole section is talking about wisdom, and
Yeah.
wisdom is crying out. And this is true financially, health wise.
Yeah.
If you want to get better at something, wisdom is literally everywhere.
Yeah,
You have to ignore wisdom. No, thank you. I'm not interested.
yeah,
If you want to get better at something, there's YouTube, there's people who are smarter than you. And so that's kind of the theme of Proverbs in this part is wisdom is crying out, and you have to put on blinders not to see it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So starting in verse 4, say to wisdom, you are my sister, and to insight, you are my relative. They will keep you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words.
That's right.
At the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed the young man, a youth who had no sense. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house. He should have waysed it a different way, and
Yeah.
even if it took longer and not
Yeah.
gone this
Yeah.
way, right? He was going down the street near her corner, walking along the direction of her house. At twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in, then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute with crafty intent. And so you want me to keep reading?
yeah. Just keep going.
So
I mean,
she's-
just talking about these characteristics in a sense of like the type of woman that you need to be careful around. You
Yeah.
know.
She is unruly and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks.
I'm sitting. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
just
this
sitting here saying it's like a party girl.
So this is the opposite of the Proverbs 31, right?
I mean, yeah, it's like someone who's always out at night, always running around, always partying, always drinking. And for me, it's like, I heard a story once of this woman, and I don't even know if it's a real story or if I think it's a real story because I remember the person writing it was somebody who was a Christian lady. And when she was younger, apparently she'd been looking for a guy at church, and this really she thought was a good looking guy came to church. He was really godly. And she said to her grandmother, I'm going to marry him. And her grandmother laughed at her and said, a man like that would never marry a woman like you, because she was out partying, drinking. And her grandmother's message was like, what would make you think that this godly man would want to, And so it's like godly men need to be godly men so that godly women are interested, and godly women, the same thing. It's like, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
But when I read this, that's what jumps out to me,
And it's not that you have to be perfect. Or
No,
some
you're
of
not
us
gonna be
have
perfect,
Come to
no.
Christ later in life,
Absolutely.
and we have this baggage we didn't know better. But it's just to say, if you need to be working on who you are to get someone who is also working on who they
Sure.
are, right?
Absolutely.
All right, you want me to keep going down?
Yeah.
So then this is what happens. Verse 13, she took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face she said, today I fulfilled my vows, and I have food for my fellowship offering at home. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you and have found you. I've covered my head and my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. My husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and will not be home till full moon.
So she says, hey, look, my husband's not home. We'll never get caught. No one will ever know. Let's have some fun. That's what she says.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
With persuasive words, she led him astray, and she seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once, he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter.
Yeah, immediately he went after her, my translation says. And it says, so he, in this sense, he's going to bed with her. And look at what it describes it as. An ox going to what?
To the slaughter.
The slaughter.
Like a deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces his liver. Like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death.
So it says, you have this young man who sees this pretty woman. She's a smooth talker, and he thinks, oh, this is going to be, it's temptation. It's Hebrews 11. It's going to be enjoyable. And yet God describes it in the long run as what? Like an
Death.
ox going to the slaughter, you know? Like, remember that. I mean, that's, for me, that's one. I mean, that's why I have a list of these that I have in my Bible, you know, that I will read from time to time, you know, when you need that sort of lesson.
Yeah, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah.
Think about it. Like, that's,
and it's like, hey,
that man, what's that? I mean, that's pretty low. You're a dumb animal. You're about to get, you know.
You're a dumb animal going to the slaughter if you fall for this.
Yeah.
Basically. And I'm not saying that like, look, people fall for it, but you learn from this. You know, we need to learn from it. I got so many more on the list. I mean, I've got 9:13. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knows nothing. Of course, foolish man too. 11:16. A gracious woman retains honor. Ruthless men retain riches. 11:22. As a ring of gold in a swine or a pig's snout, so is a lovely woman who lacks discretion. Same thing for a man.
Man, that's almost like, and it is because it's a harsh reality, but that's kind of insulting.
It is insulting. It is.
A gorgeous woman without any kind of restraint or wisdom is just like putting a gold ring in the snout of a pig.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, and you can say the same thing for men, obviously, but wow.
Yeah, God's pretty plain.
He
Sometimes it depends on where you're at and what the issue is. Sometimes he's definitely pretty plain.
Mm-hmm. This one says, this is Proverbs 22:14. The mouth of an immoral woman is a deep pit. He who is abhorred by the Lord will fall there. 22, that's 14. I got 30:20. This is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes with her mouth and says, I have done no wickedness. For 3 things the earth is perturbed. That's good enough. I mean, it talks more about a hateful woman in this later, but all right. And then I got 31:30. Last one. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Proverbs talks a lot about it. Woman who fears the Lord.
Yeah, and we're tempted a lot of times just to go after someone who we're attracted to, which I don't think you should date someone you're not attracted to. That's going to set you up for failure. So none of us are naive enough to say that's not important. Of course it is. But Proverbs also says men get to the point where they would rather live in the streets than to be inside with a contentious woman.
I would rather live on the corner of a rooftop than to dwell in a house with a contentious woman.
Getting sunburned, birds flying over, stinks out here,
dripping
than to be
water.
inside.
Yeah.
And so it's important to find someone who's enjoyable to live with.
Yeah.
That's way more important than looks, though obviously that's important. But just consider that.
Yeah, and the thing is always like, remember the most important thing in a marriage for a Christian should be the spiritual aspect. Like that's an important part of it. Don't say, well, this girl's gorgeous. Look, I've done this in the past. These are prayers that God said no. And I'm like so thankful looking back. It's like Garth Brooks, unanswered prayers, or Brad Paisley. God answers every prayer you pray, but sometimes his answer is no. Nope.
Yeah.
And so if you see a pretty woman, but she is like no discretion, right? God says, yeah, she might be pretty, but that's not what you want, right? You want to make sure that she's spiritual, right?
I agree.
And that we're not picking on the ladies. It's the same thing. There's lots of Christian
young
young women.
Not good to you,
if you got a male model, he's a good looking guy, but he's not worried about spiritual things. Remember, it's gonna be the father of your kids one day.
You can do better.
Absolutely.
That's the big reality check for you. If you actually care anything at all about having children and you want children in the future, you better really think about what this other person is going to say, do, how they behave. That's going to matter a lot more to you when those days come than anything else.
I agree.
The nature of who they are, their character. You know?
That's what my dad said. My dad would always tell me growing up, don't date anybody you wouldn't marry, and don't marry anybody that you wouldn't trust to raise your kids if you pass away.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth of it. Like, whoever you date, and this is my recommendation, right? Date somebody that if you marry and they're a faithful Christian, and you were to have, if I was to have a heart attack next week, right, and die, I know that my wife would raise my kids faithfully.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel the same.
Yeah. So anyway.
And you know who hates to hear that advice? Single people, teenagers. But you know who knows that it's true?
Yeah.
Every person that's married.
Yeah. Totally.
Totally. Yeah, it's like, but here's the thing. I mean, I think teenagers can understand this concept at least. Maybe not the actual. They know that little kids don't understand things the same way they do. Yeah. They get that, right? Yeah. If you're a teenager watching, you get that the little kids, your little 6-year-old brother or sister or whoever, your friends, if you don't have any, they don't think the same way as you. They don't understand the same things as you. Yeah. And you watch them do things sometimes that you would just frankly call dumb.
Yeah.
All right. Like, it's not wise. You
Yeah.
knew better. And maybe even you told them, but they did it anyway. And that it's just the same thing. Just go forward a little bit. We're not saying that, you're not going to get there. What we're saying is just be patient and do it the right way so you don't hurt yourself or
Yeah.
others along the way.
Yeah.
That
Well
bad
said.
things don't happen, right?
Yeah.
You can get that concept,
Yeah.
even if you haven't been there, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Good point.
Absolutely. So talking about guarding our hearts and putting good things into our hearts, what are some New Testament passages you can think of?
Ephesians
Okay.
4:29. Let
Okay.
no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers.
Yeah.
And that one's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to make sure that your words impart grace to the hearers.
Yeah, that's hard. And that's in the context too of
Practice
Ephesians.
that at the grocery store, wherever. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're waiting
for
for a table at a restaurant, you've had to wait for 10 to 15 minutes, right?
That's right. Then you can just have the corrupt words.
Yeah. No,
It's
of
okay.
course not.
No.
We're trying to
obviously,
be,
no.
yeah, we're supposed to be different, So
Yeah.
like, where are you going to have opportunities to be different? Look for them. You're waiting at a restaurant, and everyone else is complaining because they had to wait for 15 to 20 minutes, Like, remember, hey, you're supposed to be different,
And look for friends that hold you accountable to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just the big stuff, but that little things like this are big.
Yeah.
And so surround yourself with people that are willing to say, hey, cool it, right?
Yeah.
Mature enough to have friends that will help you and correct you when needed.
Absolutely. In Ephesians 4, you read 29, that's kind of in the context of putting on the new man and basically saying, look, like, be careful you don't get past feeling or calloused or have your conscience seared to where stuff that used to bother you doesn't bother you anymore, And so there in Ephesians 4:22 and 23, all leading up to 4:29, talks about, be renewed. And by rejecting the instruction of God, Ephesians 4:30 says you can grieve the Holy Spirit. So when you rebel against teachings of God, you grieve him. Isaiah 63:10 says this. But the people rebelled and grieved his Holy Spirit. He turned against them as an enemy and fought against them. It's like what you said, like when you turn against God, he'll fight you. And if you want to go to heaven, that's kind of a good thing if he disciplines you.
Yeah, you better hope that he cares enough to try to get you back.
Yeah. Yeah.
There will come a day that he'll stop.
Yeah.
He talks about that too.
Yeah. 2 Thessalonians 2:10-11. He says he'll send you a strong delusion if you reject and don't love the truth.
Yep.
He'll let you go.
You can fight him long enough that he will give up.
Yeah.
So be weary of that.
Yeah.
Look for the correction. Look for the things in your life that you might be doing. Be humble.
Yeah. Yeah. Got any thoughts? I got another one, but I'm trying not to be the one that talks most of the time.
No, you're good. Go
Colossians 3:8. But now you yourselves are to put off all these. Talking about the new man. Anger, wrath, the Christian, the new convert. Put off anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. I had a problem with this one in college. I played baseball. Everyone on that team had a filthy mouth, including me. But filthy language, the word is compound in Greek, and it means to say or to tell and filthy, shameful, dishonest things. So one of the Greek lexicons I have, BDAG, probably get sick of hearing that if you watch a lot of stuff I do, says a speech of a kind that is generally considered in poor taste, obscene speech, or dirty talk. There's a lot of times you don't have to say a 4-letter word to do that, But as Christians, we're supposed to put off. That's one of the things we put off. Anger, be angry and don't sin.
Yeah, innuendo.
Yeah.
That's very filthy.
Yeah.
It can be very filthy.
Yeah.
And
It doesn't have to be, but most of the time, most innuendo in our society, it's people pervert it.
Mm-hmm.
So
and Colossians 3:8 says put off these things, but
Yeah.
Colossians 3:10 says to put on the new self.
That's right.
And I think that's a good principle. If you're going to remove lust from your life,
Yes.
you better replace it with something, or there's now a void.
Yeah.
And it's going to fill with something.
Yeah.
So if you're taking off something, you put something on. And so that's what you see here in verse 10.
This is what the lexicon I have says. It's talking about Aristotle. It quotes Aristotle. It says this word, the filthy talk, contrasts. So filthy talk is the opposite of it says contrast the preference for obscenity in older drama with the more refined taste of later times. Obscenity can be expected from those of servile nature, but not from a cultured gentleman. So the Greek lexicon referencing Aristotle's writing says that word is used when Aristotle says, you've got cultured gentlemen who don't talk like that. And then you've got this base, filthy, shameful type of people that talk that way. So as Christians, which one do you think we ought to be? I mean, the cultured gentleman. If you're trying to teach somebody about how to go to heaven and be saved from sins and not go to hell, who are you going to take your advice from? I would think somebody who seems like they're cultured. And I don't mean like in the sense of, they're fancy. And no, I'm just saying like a gentleman, Anyway, I don't know.
And it kind of makes me think of putting something off, putting something on. If we're going to change, we've got to change our rituals.
Yeah.
So like you talked about, if you have a temptation with sexual sin, pornography, like you can't go to bed alone with your cell phone.
Yeah.
You just can't do that. You have to change that ritual. So it's like if you want to quit smoking, you get rid of ashtrays.
Yeah.
You don't go to the inside the gas station, And so we're going to have to do some of these things with our phones. And we have a friend, Joe Wells. He's got a site, Kaio, Kaio. And they have a link to Covenant Eyes.
Okay.
So we all have some friends that do this. They have a smartphone. They have to for work or family, but they have this app, and it every day sends a report to whoever their accountability partner is. But on the Kaio website, there's a link. I think maybe you get a discount in a tutorial.
Cool.
But if you're watching and you're struggling with sexual temptation, get this Covenant Eyes and get some help from people.
Yeah.
Change your rituals. I think it's Cliff Goodwin that said, whatever doesn't come naturally must come intentionally.
Yeah.
So if it's not natural to resist some of these things, you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
You have to be mature about it. Change your rituals.
Yeah, that's a good point. Cool. All right. Conclusion. As Christians, got to be careful what we watch and listen to in today's entertainment, because our conscience can easily be sort of like sponges soaked in the wrong content. And then that affects our heart and our mind. And so we have a hard time making smarter decisions in our actions. We need to make smart decisions in what we absorb, because those things will influence our heart. And increase the likelihood of us lusting after things, which we want to cut off. We want to try and work on that. So as Scripture tells us, as it warns us, we need to be careful with our eyes and ears, what we see and hear, because it could corrupt your heart and your soul. What's the last Scripture you guys think of, how you can avoid temptation?
I want to know Philippians 4:8-9.
Okay.
And
you can make.
I was going to say, I want to know, is this a command? I think it's a command.
Yeah, it is.
Read it. We want to read.
Philippians 4:8-9. Go ahead.
Yeah. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy.
That's a command. Meditate.
Meditate on these things.
Yeah, imperative. So
the
meditate.
Things, and of course he adds on the end, the things which you've learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do.
That's command 2. Imperative.
That's right.
Present
So,
imperative. These do. Continue to do. Continue to meditate.
What's if that's what I'm authorized to do, is think about these things.
Yeah.
What am I not authorized to do?
Think about other things.
Well, and he
Which
just
are
said,
what? Not these, right?
Not true, noble, pure.
Right.
And he just said in verse 6, don't be anxious.
Yeah.
Well, okay, great. I won't be anxious. No. Well, here's the way. You replace the anxiety with thinking about these
Good
things.
point.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, verse 6, be anxious. It's a command, imperative, for nothing. Don't be anxious, but in everything by prayer and supplication, give it to God. Let your request be made known. That's a command. And God will give you peace, and meditate on these good things.
Yeah. Instead of those bad things,
That's
think
right.
on these things.
Let
So
God
think
do
and
his
pray.
part, and
That's
you
right.
do your part.
That's right. That's exactly right.
The last verse I had was Galatians 6:2.
Yeah.
It talks about bearing each other's burdens. If you're struggling with these things, reach out and get help. It's not weak to ask for
No.
help. You know who didn't ask for help in Scripture? Nobody. Everybody that did right asked for help at some point. They had help from people. And so I can't keep this command to bear your burdens if I don't know what they are.
Sure.
And
That's
you
right.
can't keep it if I don't let you
And
know.
that's verse 1.
So don't struggle in silence and solitude, right? Yeah, right. So reach out if you need help. There's nothing wrong with that. We all do. Reach out.
Great thoughts. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us today on the Authentic Christian Podcast. I'm Aaron. This is Scott. And this is our special guest, Matt Wallen. Thank you for watching. We'll see you back on the next episode. Have a great day. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Authentic Christian Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Gospel Broadcasting Network, or GBN for short. You can hop on the App Store, search Gospel Broadcasting Network, and you can download the app. And there's this show, many other great shows that you can watch or listen to and start learning more about the Bible and why we're here, what our purpose is. Thanks for listening.